Afternoon, beautiful people. Okay, so today I haven't made a video for a little while, but I thought I'd better catch up on a few things. In one of my videos, I called it philosophy of politics, but someone pulled me up on that and said rather than philosophy, it was more sociology that I was talking about. For me, philosophy is a way of thinking about a subject. Some say it is about being analytical, but to be philosophical can be contemplative or contemplation without the need for a response or action too. And it is much about talking and discussing about the now and about what's happening now as it is to think about historical issues that affect now. It can also be about discussing the now moment, but without having to take action on it, accepting that it is as it is, such as accepting the results of Brexit or the results of the USA elections, looking at it in a contemplative, philosophical way, discussing it without needing to change it. That's what I think I'm all about, discussing situations without a need to change them, without need for recounts, new elections, different outcomes. It comes with an acceptance of how it is, but looking at how we can deal with how it is. And just because I'm accepting how it is, it doesn't mean I can't have an opinion on it. So, first of all, I must apologise to my American friends if you find this offensive, but all I can say is only in America. I saw a status yesterday from an American friend. One part of it said, and I can nod and agree with this part. I just sat shaking my head in disbelief at the second part, though. To it, I say that only Americans will, in just days, change course and allow themselves to be so misled out of patriotism. The status went like this: "Oh my God, what are you people like? What's wrong with you?" First, I saw a news report featuring a corporate executive saying his company would not do business with people who did not support his personal choice for president. Say what? Doesn't he realise that he just lost half of his potential customers? This is what he says. And I guess there's more to the saying, "you can't fix stupid," that meets the eye. And that's what the status said. That's the first half of it. Yep, I get that bit a little bit. I can understand, where that person's coming from, because it's a bit like Brexit. If those of Europe keep saying we won't do deals with the UK, this will mean the destruction of many businesses within their own country. Of course, we will still need those companies to continue to do deals with the UK. This is a rich country, and that's why it thrives on keeping rich, or at least appearing so, whilst many thousands, just like America, die in the cold, homeless, sleeping in the streets. And we call these wealthy countries and allow this to happen within these countries, let alone the rest of the world. For rich countries like with rich families and neighbourhoods, they must keep up these appearances, and it's all about how it appears and not about how it really is. It's all about the appearance of greatness using money as power. You're told that you're not born in a great country unless your country has riches, and riches equals power, and that's how it works, isn't it? It is a sham, it's a lie, and we all know this, but still, it's how this system that keeps us all trapped works, and we know that. But let's go back to the second point on this status, the part that had me shaking my head with my mouth open. It said the mainstream media had done everything possible to brainwash the American people into believing that Donald Trump is a racist. That's where I just sat there and what? Please get this. Donald Trump is a racist. Nobody is making that up. He wants to build walls to keep people out who are of a different race. Therefore, he is a racist. Simple. He is an open racist, but now he's president, all of a sudden we have the American people waving their flags at Donald Trump and making out they didn't hear any of the things that they heard him say with, it's just, to me, just madness. Sure, I get it. Hillary was not a good option. I get it. Trump got voted to power because they didn't want Hillary. Nobody wanted Hillary. And that's right too. Nobody wanted her. Why should they want her? She stands for everything, staying the same. And that's right, isn't it? But to say Trump isn't now what he has built his campaign on saying is madness. Additionally, the status goes on to say, and now the mainstream media is going out of their way to convince the American people that the black man now being considered for a cabinet position in the Trump administration isn't qualified. And it says, what the fuck? He says, are you starting to see the bigger picture here? If not, it may be time to check your pulse. Just saying, winky face. It really is quite scary to me how riled up people can get over their country and their president, and now he's in. The same people who during the elections have been saying what a racist, nasty, bigoted man he is. We are mad people, the people of the world, and we're getting madder. This is mentally insane behaviour. And you have to understand, we're looking on and watching people going further and further insane, knowing that we're all in the same cooking pot getting cooked. I'm not saying that Trump can't change his mind on certain things now, such as climate change. Perhaps he will become better educated on the subject, or because maybe, just maybe, just like when Obama made his speeches about closing Guantanamo Bay, bringing troops home from Iraq, all the other things that he was voted to power for, and they were talking about how things will change. Just maybe Trump has now also been behind that same curtain to discover who really does run America and the rest of the world. The banks, the Rothschilds, the wicked cabal. And also, he too will do the same as the rest of them. I'm starting to see his speeches changing already. I watched a clip about his beginning to turn against Putin, although his speech remains similar in it is changing in tone against those Obama had already clearly been against. And it will be interesting to watch the psychology of politics unfold over the next few months. But to watch the American people suddenly see it all as a media conspiracy and a media agenda that Trump is portrayed as a racist, sorry guys, we cannot buy that one. It is plain and utter nuts. And if you believe this is some media conspiracy, then you will allow yourself to believe anything, frankly. Are you all going to go along with this conspiracy media idea and be brainwashed along with this chap? I wonder. You're seeing what you want to see, and that's how the philosophy of politics works in the end. And it works if you allow it to work out of patriotism. If you want to change in America and in the world, you have to stop falling for these ideas that it's all a nasty setup. That the words that come out of somebody's mouth, especially somebody like Trump, he's somebody that speaks openly about what he really thinks, and that's why I think a lot of people liked him. But now they're saying, well, actually, it's all a conspiracy. I'm sorry, that's a little bit out there, that one. This future vision of change cannot happen, and you cannot depend on philosophy of history if you want to change. You can only depend on a few facts. In particular, it depends on truth, like scientific facts. And some of my friends will be shocked at me saying this, being so spiritually orientated, but please hear me out on this. There are many conditions of philosophy, yet we cannot limit the conditions of philosophy to the comings and goings of science alone. These conditions of what humans call fact are science because they can be observed. But we need to also rely on the philosophy of politics, art and love. Another concept of the infinite. If we want a more positive world, one that is not run on fear and misleading lies, because that itself is a conspiracy and agenda that you all keep following, expecting different results. To get what you truly want, change, which is the reason you chose Trump over Hillary, this philosophy must also be based on new forms of revolutionary politics and on new figures of love that have emerged in the context of psychoanalysts, as well as on the complete transformation of all questions concerning sexuation and gender. These things are important for certain reasons, and I'll go into that more later. But for the future of philosophy depends on its capacity for progressive adaptation to the changing of its conditions. Philosophy has always comes in the aftermath of a non-philosophical innovations. And we have been on a wave of spiritual change, but that alone is not enough. The human brain isn't ready to change on spiritual values and love alone. We've seen this. The human brain is far too embossed into the material world to get beyond it and see the necessity to change on purely the basis of meditative prayer and belief. Only the most awake and enlightened see the way, and that it excludes important people who haven't woken up to this in themselves yet. And they are important. They're all voters. They will wake up, but they're not ready for this yet. And there's no point in pushing them to do so. Only leads them to seeing those who have as religious nuts. Jeremy Corbyn is seen as one of those by the likes of Tony Blair, who scarily enough is returning to politics on the back of exactly this idea that Jeremy is the one who's crazy and he the sane one, the man who took us to war to find things that didn't exist, the man who caused the rise of ISIL. But there are still voters out there who will still believe that Blair's version of the world, that it and the UK cannot thrive or exist through peaceful means and ways, that we must continue to sell arms to countries who use them to commit atrocities and crimes against humanity in certain parts of the world like Yemen and Syria. We don't want Tony Blair back, but he seems to be a law unto himself right now. And that is more of the brainwashing we are looking at too. When we see the flag wavers, we see the idea that Trump is a racist, it being some media-led conspiracy. You know, if somebody like Blair got back in, heaven forbid, you know, out of patriotism wouldn't the world look on and say, sheer madness, wouldn't they? People allow themselves to be blinded very quickly to what they don't want to believe, and that's the problem. Philosophy is the discipline that comes after the day of knowledge, such as the knowledge that Trump will now be president. So after the day of real-life experiments, philosophy requires new creative experiments in science, politics, art or love for it to change. Art, love and spirituality or belief is necessary within the mix, but as I say, humans are not ready for love alone to change our path. The way things have been, though, our civilization appears exhausted, and the future that we are capable of imagining is a sombre one, a future of perpetual obscurity. The future of philosophy will die, a dying slow death of the end of philosophy. It is also a philosophical idea. Moreover, it's often a positive idea. Philosophy has perhaps reached its end because it is capable of grasping what is absolute knowledge. For Marx, philosophy, as interpreted of the world, may be replaced by a concrete transformation of the same world negative abstraction represented by the old philosophy must be destroyed to liberate the affirmation, the great yes to all that exists, and the analytical tendency, the metaphysical phrases must be deconstructed in favour of clear propositions and statements under the paradigm of modern logic. In all of these cases, we see how the great declarations about the death of philosophy in general, or of metaphysics in particular, are most likely the rhetorical means to introduce a new path, a new aim within philosophy itself. The best way to say we have needed the idea of the New Ager, the best way to say we have needed this idea of the New Ager, the best way to say we have needed this is that people will have seen it as being too out there, too woo-woo, for people to grasp. And it awakens us to something more concrete, such as I am a new philosopher, rather than I'm a New Ager, I'm a new spiritualist. How about being a new philosopher? That's something more real. It's probably to say with great emphasis, philosophy is over, philosophy is dead, because that's the end of something old. I propose that this new philosophy, where it begins something entirely new, not philosophy alone, but thinking, not philosophy alone, but the force of life, not philosophy, but a new rational language. In fact, not the old philosophy, but the new philosophy, which is mine. I am responsible for my philosophy, for my thinking. And it is not impossible that the future of philosophy always takes the form of a resurrection. The old philosophy, like the old man, is dead, but this death is in fact the birth of a new man, of the new philosopher. However, there exists a close relationship between resurrection and the immortality, between the greatest imaginable change, the passage of death to life, and the most incomplete absence of change imaginable when we place ourselves in the joy of salvation. Perhaps the repetition of the new idea of the end of philosophy, joined with the repeated idea of a new beginning of thought, is the sign of a fundamental immobility of the old philosophy. It is possible that a new philosophy can then be seen as a birth and a death in the same way spirituality has tried to handle it with its talk of this new world and are discussing the attempt of manifesting what we want into being through the law of attraction. Of course, manifesting something like change into something can only occur through action, and that's where spirituality falls down. People cannot manifest what their mental blocks are placing before them. If there's more blocks ahead, then spirituality, prayer alone cannot bring it about. Now, I actually do believe in prayer. I believe that manifesting things into being, if there is no blocks in the way, if there's a pure belief that something can happen, it can happen through the spiritual path. However, there are, as I said, too many people that have got these mental blockages that need to be brought down first before any of this can happen. So manifesting something like change can only occur through action, and that's where spirituality falls down. People cannot manifest what their mental blocks are placing more blocks before them. Spirituality speaks of praying for something, causing it to be manifested with no action. The law of attraction tried to deal with the removing of those emotional blocks, but again, we're so stuck in this physical material world to get beyond it with a belief. So to manifest anything, we must all take action. If we want to see change and if we want a peaceful world, we have to do it by actioning peace. And that is a no-brainer. So are we instead seeing the madness that we see in the streets of the USA when Trump was voting to president, and the likes of the Ku Klux Klan are now, I think, out there in the streets, think that this vote is now a go-ahead to dress up in white robes and cause chaos against people that are of a different race, regardless of where they were born. Here lies the absolute madness for many reasons, because the minds of men seem to see everything in either black or white, bad or good, with no in between. They need their views and values backed up with fact, and for those types of people, voting a racist bigot to power, excuse me, gave fuel to that view. These people, who would happily go burn a house down with a small child inside, do not see themselves as the same as a member of ISIL murdering a Christian. Now that's where this madness is, it's crazy. There are these Christian missionaries out there. There are people out there that are going out just to help other people, to feed people whilst they're being bombed apart. But most of these people of the likes of the Ku Klux Klan are actually Christians committing these crimes with a belief that white people are supreme beings. This evil is the same evil, no more or less, than the evil of ISIL. That's absolute fact. Yet it's treated differently by the media to protect the new president-elect. The media will not cover the Ku Klux Klan behaviour on your news because they're Americans. because they would be Christians hidden under those cloaks. There's no difference between this level of evil, yet many Americans continue to hate with a vengeance Muslims and anyone of a different race because it's non-American. Failing to look at that is what's going on, and this is the problem. It's going on at its own back door. Racism is evil, and where we project and point the finger at Muslims, don't stop there. It's happening everywhere. It's happening in the UK. I'm not here to just, bash Americans. It's happening in the UK. I'm so sorry, my throat's a bit sore again today. So these white supremacist groups, they're no less evil and no less stupid. These white supremacists in the UK are using Brexit as well, with the same idea as Trump being voted to office, where it gives those racist bigots the idea that the rest of the USA agrees with this, or the rest of the UK agrees with this, and that this is the majority. Wherever we live, taking to the streets, throwing bricks at shop windows, creating more hate while saying we want Britain back. We want British rule. How do we make Britain great by creating this hatred? Or this shout for the USA, USA? It's madness. We can't fight for peace with this kind of hatred and violence. Now, I myself was a voter for Brexit at the time, and the reason for that was more political, the TTIP things, and trying to stop harm being done to the NHS. It absolutely wasn't for the reasons of any racism or, sort of wanting to fence ourselves in at all. And a lot of other people have the same view as me. I'm so sorry about my throat. You cannot fight justice with injustice, but this is how our courts and systems have been doing it for so long, and it's still doing it now. It's done it to me. And this is how our governments like Bush, Obama, Blair, May and the likes continue to do it. Trying to create peace with war. Isn't that madness? There needs to be a new philosophy born, a new way of thinking that is not too woo-woo and out there for people to grasp something that isn't wholly spiritual, and certainly not people versus atheists, or in other words, God believers versus non-God believers. It is the way the human brain works that causes this, and we see our brains do indeed work in two separate hemispheres. We've seen that lady, Bolt Taylor, talk about her, she had a stroke, speaking about the two sides and the two hemispheres of the brain, and how she knew about the brain, so she could know which parts of her brain were working while she was having that stroke. Anyone that hasn't actually seen that really needs to go to YouTube and YouTube that and watch that video. It is about the brain doctor who had a stroke. And so we need science anyway to show us something that is fact first, to see why the old philosophy and the old way of using God and spirit to no chance of winning over all or even most of the people. There are far too many naysayers stuck in the idea that things are things, and the only thing that exists is what they can see and experience. So those who are stuck in the philosophy that philosophy depends on science, all the while making extremely strange argument, namely that philosophy has no history at all, that philosophy is always the same thing. In this case, the problem with the future of philosophy is in fact that the future of philosophy is past, with this idea though that everything stays the same. But what does this same really mean? What is the sameness of the same philosophy? It's essentially that it is a reflexive mode of knowledge, that the knowledge of truth in the theoretical domain, the knowledge of values of the practical domain, we must organise the process where those two fundamental forms of knowledge are acquired and transmitted. The philosopher organises the questions concerning the truth and values, or philosophy is not really a form of knowledge, whether theoretical or practical. Rather, it consists in the direct transformation of a subject being a radical conversion or a complete upheaval of existence. Consequently, philosophy comes very close to religion, even though it means they are exclusively rational. It comes very close to love, but without the support of desire. Very close to political commitment, but without the constraint of centralised organisation. Very close to artistic creation, but without the sensible means of art. Very close to scientific knowledge, but without the formalisation or formalism of mathematics or the empirical and technical means of physics. So philosophy is not necessarily a subject, it's a free address of someone to someone else, is ideas or poems that change thought without imposition. As religion, it seems always gets people's backs up because of its imposition. Philosophy is an idea that creates a light bulb moment which moves the individual into a state of thought using knowledge and love. Because as we know, truth is subjective and it cannot be found until we are all having that same moment, the moment that spiritualists call the epiphany. Philosophy is no more knowledge than it is knowledge of knowledge itself. It's an action that identifies a philosophy that are not the rules of a discourse, but the singularity of an act. It is this act through that the enemies of Socrates designated its corrupting the youth. This is the reason why Socrates was condemned to death. To corrupt the youth is, after all, a very apt name to designate the philosophical act, provided that we understand the meaning of corruption. To corrupt here means to teach the philosophy of refusing all blind submission to established opinions. To corrupt means to give the youth certain means to change their opinion with regard to social norms, to substitute debate and rational critique for imitation and approval, and even if the question is a matter of principle, to substitute revolt for obedience. But this revolt is neither spontaneous nor aggressive, to the extent it is the consequence of principles and of the critique offered for the discussion of all. There is such a thing as logical revolts, a good definition of the philosophical act, but if the true essence of philosophy consists in being an act, we understand better why division amongst the opinions about scientific knowledge occur, the division between materialism and idealism. And we end up with a vicious circle that has to come around to an agreement somewhere. Materialism is the conservative framework for theoretical activities, and idealism is the liberal framework. Therefore, philosophy is like a political struggle in the theoretical field. The theoretical act always takes the form of a decision, a separation, a clear distinction between knowledge and opinion, between correct and false opinions, between truth and falsity, between good and evil, between wisdom and madness, between the affirmation position and the purely critical position. The philosophical act always has a more normal dimension because it's a thing that can be witnessed. Divisions also occur in hierarchy, materialism and idealism. Where we have become so materialistic, we see the idea of materialism as the good one and idealism as the bad. Or, in other words, conservatism a good ideal and liberalism as the bad. But more generally, we see that the division introduced among the concepts or experiences is in fact always a way of imposing a new hierarchy, especially for the youth. And from a negative standpoint, the result is the intellectual overturning of an established order and an old hierarchy, which would never go down well. And I don't think will ever be allowed to happen unless the people become aware of the fact that they are all still right here in that right now being brainwashed. So you've got to become aware of it, that it is happening to you right now anyway, whether you like it or not. We all say, well, we don't like this. We don't like this happening to us and we don't want that and we'll never let this happen. But I'm sorry to say that it is already happening. It's happened. There is also the great philosophy that possibility rather that Trump is very likely being brainwashed too. Big statement, but it is one that I believe to be something that could be seen as a reality. And where I said it, I believe. But let's watch things change and to not let's watch things. The expectation of change turn into not changing at all over the next few months and years. Now, you might also watch Obama suddenly go back to being Mr. Nice Guy in the near future, and people will all be saying, wow, what a lovely president we had, failing to remember that he too was a warmonger who didn't stick to anything that he promised. So in philosophy, we have something that is invariant, something of the order of a compulsion to repeat or like the eternal return of the same. This is also something that we are watching happening before our eyes right now until we get to the point, as has happened with Obama, where everyone's waving at their flag, hoping for change, but within a year sitting wondering how change didn't happen at all. And as the world looks on and sees the same thing happening over and over again, expecting different results, the reality is that the people actually do not like change at all, even though they're calling for it. And so their leader falls into alignment with what the people are asking for, what they're calling for, and what has always been. And the people are standing there wondering why there's no change. And this new leader is not changing a thing. It is the people's doing as much as it is the leader, and as much as it is the banks and those in real charge. Nobody really wants the change enough. Everyone still wants their cheaper oil, and so they go to war to get that, and selling of arms will continue. And this is the order of the action and not the knowledge. It is as subjective as it is, it's it's crazy. Nobody really wants that change enough. That's the problem. That is the deepest problem within it all. Most of the youth become a philosopher and knows perfectly well that young people are the ones who must make the decisions about their lives and who are most often ready to accept the risks of a logical revolt. However, having said that, we need a vast majority of older people happy to revolt also. And we have actually seen that in the Labour leadership with Jeremy Corbyn, where we can see that many of the youth are being loaded with debt, and parents and the like and grandparents do not want to see this happening to their children and their grandchildren. So it is happening. It's happening certainly more in the UK. It can only be transformed on the growing and unavoidable importance of our experiences of something like the feminine, as I said, I'll discuss earlier, or acceptance of diversity in the dimension of sexuality, or seeing things, having experienced things happening that are so extreme, like the children being in so much debt. This also the acceptance of diverse race too, bringing about peace, love and acceptance globally, which will ultimately bring about the changes we're really seeking for. One without an elitist world order in charge. This kind of radical change has to come from the people themselves. This is why many parties, like the Labour Party, are grasping these issues such as feminism and sexuality as their policy points, and also the green side of things as well. To alter something radical, it begins with radicalism itself. So ironically, whilst the people of America call for change, they actually wanted someone who won't radicalise, who disagrees with change, who will build walls that that would not allow radical change. So let's remind ourselves again why the American people voted for Trump. Wasn't it because they were calling for change? Yeah, whilst their fear is of that very change and socialism and freedom they call for, they actually voted for no change at all. So don't be at all surprised if all they ultimately get is more of the same, and they write statuses asking others to check their pulse. Can you try to understand that whilst you are feeling conned by your leaders, these are the choices you have made because of your own underlying fear to be open to what true change entails? I think some of the people of the UK are more ready to change and go through a revolution than those of the USA, and those Americans who say our Brexit vote was the same type of protest vote as their vote for Trump for the same reason. Well, this is where they were all misled, I think, and we're misled by our media and political agenda. With those votes, change is not coming. It's not going to come at all. This is why we have to finally speak of a creative repetition. There's something which takes the form of a gesture of division. And there is, under the pressure of certain events and other consequences, the need to transform certain aspects of the philosophical gesture. We thus have a form, and we have the variable form of the unique form. This explains why we can clearly recognise philosophy and the philosophers in spite of their enormous differences and their violent conflicts. The history of philosophy is a battlefield, and it is also the repetition of the same battle. It is the same field. And all this takes place after certain events in politics, in art, in science, in love, events that have given rise to the need for a new variation on the same theme. Philosophers work for the rise of a new truth. They believe that one day the bright obvious will rise up to be the last stage of philosophy, the absolute idea, the complete revelation. But this never comes to pass, as we have to repeat the philosophical act and create a new variation as a creative repetition, as it will forever be the case that we must endure our thoughts created by our fears and their outcomes. None is probably more worrying for us today than those that are tied to the political condition. People now are expecting to escape the discipline of the current state of affairs. With what they truly believe, they have something different. We know this since each of these collectives in the politically limited but historically assured form of the mass movement has given proof of a form of existence that is intertwined with the games of the economy and the state. Whilst the youth, worried about their future, hope that change will come and rescue them from their debt, and society itself has netted and ensnared them within, harassed by police and stigmatised by society, where riots fire up the masses in the impoverished neighbourhoods or cities, and those obscure rebellious obstinacy, blamed, creating a cycle of fear versus hope. There is no escape without this hope for change. Just as those of the UK hope for a new government with a vision to change their situation, equally ensnared as the current government follows this madness in trapping the young people into the very same misery. We must drop the fear of accepting diversity by being open to a single market whilst also continuing down a Brexit path. It is the answer that you've all been looking for, the change that you've all wanted and prayed for. If you pray hope and have hoped to manifest the peace that comes along with that, it will alleviate hatred, tension and violence of the masses of ordinary wage labourers capable of holding steady jobs that brings home a weekly wage, that can lose massive percentages in tax, leaving them unable to pay their household bills, along with additional council and bedroom tax forced upon them in the midst of winter. to have a backup welfare state that works for the people, particularly as we see robots and machines slowly erode at more jobs. We must stop marginalising human beings by voting for walls to be put up to keep out the newly arrived refugees, marginalised and hated because they have taken what to other people have paid taxes, homes and forced into situations I'm sure they would never have wanted to be in that position by choice. Some will, with some without, some with and some without legal papers, not knowing how to fight for their rights, only wishing to survive. We know the smallest linkage among these, anything that may produce their inseparation, will open a new sequence of political intervention. The state, whichever state that might be, has no other major task except to prohibit, by all possible means, including violent ones, any connection, even limited, between the popular youth of the cities and the students, between the students and the mass of ordinary salaried workers, among the latter and the newly arrived refugees, and even despite its apparent naturalness, any connection between the youth and the refugees, between sons and fathers, daughters and mothers, parents and their children. It seems that the youth are more able to somehow integrate with the older generation who teach and bring them into the world. This is progress in itself that does not need to be held back. The only connection that has been able to last is the one that gathers militant intellectuals and refugees. Here there are experiments going on that take the form of restricted action, offering the resources of a political long march that would owe nothing to the parliamentary and syndicalist sham. Attempts should be made to make and encourage connections of this kind, connections that unions and party leadership must support, and which I am very aware not only in the USA but the UK many are violently against. Certainly, certain composite groups are forming and assigning themselves a set of precise tasks. Occupy this or that, create a vengeful banner, breathe life into the trail of syndicalist inertia. And it is these people who cry for peace. Let us accept and greet that what is happening, this determination of doing away with state corruption, embracing integration, is only harmful where there is fear of that human being of a different race, of a different skin colour. And so this statement I read in the beginning, denying Trump's racism, is a way of denying one's own. And of what, in this sense, it is the name of this behaviour, denial, projection, fear. In light of all of this, I come back to reflect on the strange connection which I have experienced in a deeply personal level between politics and philosophy. I will begin by noting a striking connection. On one hand, philosophy is clearly and necessarily a democratic activity. It recognises where the problems lie, whether we like it or not. It lies within each and every one of us. On the other hand, philosophers in general do not recognise the unanimously celebrated virtues of the parliamentary state and the freedom of opinion, but it is necessary to find where the difficulties of society lies, where we cry for change, yet will for no change. We thus have a contradiction between the true nature of wanting peace whilst in a democratic conception of intellectual argument and free thinking, and the explicit conceptions of philosophy in politics, which accept very often the existence of an authoritarian framing for the collective destiny of humanity, which has no fascination for the type of political regime that today dominates the West. There is something like a paradoxical relationship between three terms, democracy, politics and philosophy. We must pass from democracy to philosophy. In fact, such is the road followed in the creation of philosophy among the Greeks. The birth of philosophy is evident, dependent upon the invention by the Greeks of the first form of democratic power. But we must also pass from philosophy to politics. In fact, politics has always been one of the principal preoccupations of philosophers throughout the entire history of the becoming of philosophy. But even as politics constitutes an object of reflection for philosophy, it is not so difficult to pass from politics to democracy using philosophy rather than any other thought form, especially spiritually or religion. Yet you are entitled to your choice. If you are kind, it doesn't really matter what your thoughts are of conspiracy or non-conspiracy. But as you speak it, it is worth thinking. If not a conspiracy, then a conspiracy in what? It is time to do without oil, or can we? We won't need to ask these questions. There's a lot of talk of new renewables. I know Jeremy Corbyn is very interested in this type of progress. These things are possible to alleviate the need to rely on Arab countries for oil and the need to continue to sell arms abroad. It is in just about everything, the obvious being plastics, bitumen, tarmac on our roads. However, it goes to make fertilizers, paints, inks, dyes, and things like that. It's in our makeup, it's in all sorts of things. So we need to find some other way forward to make our lives better. And it's time to really start thinking about ways of lowering the consumption, which would be a start, changing our lifestyles. Jeremy Corbyn says check into the new sciences for energy as a way forward. This man is a very philosophical man. These things are progressive and they're not going backward. If we stop migration, it's to stop. It is as if stopping migration is top priority on our list, we have to rearrange that list because this is not the biggest problem this country and world is facing. Being kind to one another is not the problem. Being hateful, dropping bombs on people is. Learning how we can use renewable energy is. There's a lot we can change to make it easier to help rather than destroy. It's about knowing the psychology and the sociology, learning and understanding people because only people are the world's problem. Learning that war comes from hurt, angry, bombed out people who have lost their homes and families, and we should thank God for their religion, because if they were not so religious, then they would have slaughtered us all by now. War begins with greed, and we need to change what we are talking and from where and why we need to be bombing places where oil is, because we are so reliant on it. And on the Trump scene, people are in fear of the normalising of racism because he advocated for it. One commenter said normalising racism on CBS News and hints of neo-fascism on Fox News in front of an audience of millions. A CBS reporter interviewed and provided outrageously publicly for Richard Spencer, a white supremacist who had been banned from Twitter because of his racist views. She asked him if he advocated for a white America, forgetting that he is a white supremacist and that is exactly what they advocate. The reporter shockingly referred to him not as a racist and a white supremacist, but an advocate for white America. The category an advocate for white America is more than a sweetening of the racist poison and toxic ideology this monster supports. It is also providing a hint of how outright racist individuals and organisations will now be labelled. When I say monster, I mean actually the issue itself, not the person. Things do have to change and we have to use philosophy. We have to think more and talk about thinking and experiencing on the basis of history, on the basis of politics. And one last thing I want to say, it was a lovely quote by Joe Brogan. the quicker we all realise that we've been taught how to live life by people, that we are operating on the momentum of an ignorant past, the quicker we can move to a global ethic of community that doesn't value invented borders or the monopolisation of natural resources, but rather the goal of a happier, more loving humanity. Amen to that. Okay, thank you again. It's a long one, but I haven't done a video for a little while, so I hope you've enjoyed that. Bless you for listening, and I hope you've listened all the way through. Love to you all. Namaste.